What is clipping and what is limiting, and how do you use both of these tools, and when should you use them? Well, I'm going to explain that in this video. But clipping and limiting are very common tools used in mixing, but more commonly used in mastering. And so if you're trying to get your song to sound just a touch louder before it goes to Spotify, Apple Music, or any of these other streaming services, then these are definitely tools that you're going to want to know how to use. Because your music can sit right next to someone else's on Spotify, you can give the listener audio whiplash when they listen to a loud song and then a quiet song, and then back to a loud song again. And I know Spotify tries to adjust the volume, but clipping and limiting actually affect the perceived volume of a song. So even though something can still be at negative 0.1 dB, it can still sound louder depending on how the mix is and whether they're using limiting and clipping. So here we have a waveform, and blue is going to represent limiting, and red is going to represent clipping. So you can see that there are some inconsistencies going on here in the waveform. We have some quiet parts, we have some loud parts, some quiet parts, some loud parts, and it's kind of a little bit all over the place. You could use a compressor to kind of control some of these, but limiting is essentially like fast compression. It's so fast, in fact, we have a thing called brick wall limiting, where we say once it hits this certain threshold, no more. You're not allowed to go any louder. You have to get turned down. Now pay attention to that. Limiting tells it that it needs to get turned down. So let's say we set the threshold right here. None of this stuff gets affected, but this guy right here is going to get affected. So now that means the limiter is going to say, hey, you're too loud. We're going to have to turn you down. Now, a lot of people think that clipping is the same thing, but it's not. It's actually a lot different. So imagine that we actually have the threshold at the same spot here. So limiting and clipping are both set at the same threshold. So what happens to that waveform when clipping hits that threshold? What clipping does is it literally takes that part and cuts it, clips the waveform off. It doesn't turn it down. It literally just snips it. That's why it's called clipping. You can actually do this for fun in your job by taking a sound and running it through limiting and then running it through clipping and looking at the differences in the waveforms. Clipping will look a lot more squared off like that. And it actually gives a kind of gritty and distorted sound to it. You could darken a lot of things up. So now we know how the tools work. How do we actually use these in the DAW? Let me show you. So take a listen to this track here, and while it's playing, pay attention over here on the main out bus, and notice how we are about as loud as it can get, which is negative 0.1. So you see we are about as loud as we can get, and that's because I have a limiter going on here, and I'm really crushing the limiting here, and I have a ceiling of negative 0.01 dB, just to make sure that I have a little bit of headroom before it goes to smaller speakers like phones and such. But the thing is, I can still increase my perceived loudness by using some clipping. So let me show you that. So here I have an instance of Infected Mushroom Pusher by Waves, and there's this mode down here where you could switch from limit to clip, and we can turn this push knob up just a little bit and start getting some clipping. And even though we are as loud as we can get over here, we could still get some more volume and perceived volume by doing some clipping. Really pay attention to how the drums start to poke through more as I start to turn this dial up.
It's the end of the world, and it's coming right for you. End of the world, they're gonna make it through. Don't say I didn't warn you, when the mushroom cloud's coming for you. End of the world, let's say I never will know.
Quite the massive difference, am I right? That's because instead of it turning everything down, it's literally just clipping the loud parts, giving us that perceived headroom and that perceived volume that's going on, but it's really just kind of starting to distort those and clip those loud transients off. And I put that behind the limiter so that way I could actually nail down those transients. If I was to put that clipper after the limiter, I'd start to kind of lose that effect. This is one of those tips that I wish I would have learned a long time ago, and I'm kind of embarrassed I didn't know sooner. In fact, there's actually 4 more things I really wish I would have known sooner, and you can watch that in this video right here. In that video, I break down the 4 things, the 4 mixing tips I wish I would have known sooner, and I'm kind of embarrassed that I didn't. So I'll see you over there. And as always, go create.